There's a secret world just outside the hospital walls where clinicians trade stethoscopes for startups. If you've ever wondered how someone goes from seeing patients to building the future of healthcare, you're in the right place. I'm Kayla, a PA on a mission to figure out what comes next. When I started researching careers in health tech, I found confusing job titles and zero clarity on how clinicians actually made the transition. So I went straight to the source, the people who already did it. Each week, we demystify a specific career path by someone who's already living it, whether it's from the bedside to the boardroom, the startup, or something completely different. Whether you're planning your exit, passively curious, or already working in health tech, this is your insider's guide. Welcome to Corporate Espionage. And welcome back to the show. Today, I am thrilled to bring on Dr. David Eisenberg. He's a psychiatrist who left residency after his intern year, climbed up to Deputy Chief Medical Officer in less than 2 years, and then walked away from the C-suite to go back and finish residency. David turned a $250,000 expected loss into a $1 million profit at the director level, collaborated across teams from IT to operations, and even worked as a venture fellow evaluating health tech startups. He had the leadership role, but in 2023, he went back to being a PGY2 resident. So he is proving that sometimes the hardest career move isn't leaving medicine, it's actually choosing to come back. So welcome, David. I'm really excited to hear more about your story today.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was a very kind introduction. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Yeah, so let's dive right into it. I'd love to hear sort of about your journey in life that led you to medicine in the first place and to that up to kind of that PGY1 year and when kind of where your head was at, where your brain was flowing. And we'll kind of get to the beginning of the story.
Yeah, sure. Being in psychiatry, I naturally talk a lot, so let me know if I need to consolidate at all. But kind of starting from the very beginning, I would say healthcare was a pretty something that was always on my mind. Going to the clinical field is actually something that my grandfather had always wanted to do and never did. I was very close with him, so I think that was certainly like a very early influence. You want to kind of go back towards that time. Is kind of why was I initially thinking about it, things like that. And he ended up actually being the first chief information security officer, so the first CISO, and kind of built out like that field, which was very cool. So I always kind of had this combination of being interested in healthcare with a positive influence from him because he always really was pretty fascinated by it, but also like, okay, what can I do that's kind of creative? Because I always really thought that was quite neat what he did. And then also somewhat following in his footsteps where he had told me there was a large part of his like very early career where he was just kind of confused about what he wanted to do at all. So I think all those things kind of played an early role, and then took a pretty traditional like path in college, like pre-med. I did major in neuroscience, did all my research, prereqs, all that kind of stuff. Um, so that leads up into some of the, I guess, going into medicine side of it. And I worked as an EMT in a gap year as well between college and medical school. That gap year was kind of the period where I started getting more interested in kind of the entrepreneurial side of things. So during that gap year, there's a buddy of mine who also was going to medical school. We went to high school together, and we created an app called PreMD Tracker at that time. And really, I had like no idea what we were doing, but we knew like the process of navigating medical school. I went to University of Pittsburgh. You went to Johns Hopkins, and we each had, I guess, varying levels of support, you could say, in terms of like what that path looked like. Right, Pitt is a huge school. Hopkins a bit smaller. So we each kind of had like different experiences there. But we knew generally we had to do the same things, but it was still very confusing, right? Like, how many clinical hours do you need? Do I need more research, less research? Do I need to volunteer instead of do research? Like, all those things. Um, and so we created an app, and we ended up, I mean, ultimately it became defunct, really, but we ended up doing it a little bit through like the beginning of med school. We had some conversations with the AAMC and stuff. It was a very like cool experience, right? Like, how am I going to actually market this, make this, design it, that kind of thing. And I would say as far as like where things led after that was my first kind of like real like paid like non-clinical job, because we made like $5 off the app, I'm not too sure, was actually trying to sell my app like two docs that had worked in like pharma advertising, medical science liaison recruiting. They had kind of some of their own companies there that they had not practiced in some time. Tried
Okay.
to sell it to them, and they ultimately said no, but we do hire kind of like interns to work on one of our websites, which was the Almost Doctors channel, they called it at that time. So kind of curating content, things like that. It's kind of along the
Yeah.
same like lines. And that was between my first and second year of medical school. I did that. So that was kind of, I guess, like more of the launching point and getting excited that like, okay, this was possible, but I still really like, there was so much that I still didn't know. And then kind of through medical school, I know we'll get into talking about a lot of other things. I'll give you kind of the brief synopsis, like in medical school, in terms of like, okay, what do you want to do, in residency and all that. My psychiatry rotations, I had some really good psychiatrists that I rotated with in terms of like spent time with me, were patient, helped teach me the field, and I got to see some really neat things. I worked with a forensic psychiatrist, which was very cool. Um, and so I got to like go into some of the state hospitals with him. I went to court with him. I got to see him do evaluations. Um, I will not end up ultimately doing a fellowship just 'cause I'm good at this point. I think the training front of things,
Yeah, right.
but it was still a very good experience for me, and I just had a lot of like positive influences, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed being on the inpatient psych. I enjoyed the patient population. I did get to see patients get better in a pretty short amount of time. Not always, of course, but
Hmm.
it certainly did happen where patients got stabilized. So it led me towards like that path.
Having a good mentor is life changing. It
Yeah,
sounds like that happened for you.
yeah, absolutely. I felt like there was, we had half the year was spent on kind of outpatient continuity clinic. So I spent about a half a day a week to like a day a week, kind of depended, with that individual psychiatrist. I did my other rotations and stuff like that, but spending a lot of time with him was very, very helpful. And he really did kind of like mentor me through that process, showed me
Hmm.
like kind of all the options and opportunities that were available in psychiatry, right? Because I didn't even know myself like how many practice settings there were and all those kinds of things. So he really kind of showed me like the breadth of ideas. And then also I had a feeling like in psychiatry, we really still don't know much, kind of have the same treatments around for a long time. And sure, there's
Right.
newer treatments out, but I still think they're going to evolve quite a lot. So that was also something that was pretty exciting to me from the like clinical end of it.
Yeah, certainly. Room for innovation as always
Hmm.
there. Very cool. So you had that initial sort of like entrepreneurial spirit in you
Hmm.
that you got to test out a little bit, which it sounds like led you to another opportunity to flex that muscle a bit.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Hmm.
Like I said, in medical school, I was involved in a few different things. I was involved in, like some groups like the AAMC. I was involved with the first aid, like USMLE RX, and I had at that time like osmosis was growing a lot with Shiv Gaglani. He was making that and building that out a lot. Kind of things like Sketchy and Picmonic and some of the large popular like study tools were growing out at that point. Um, and so it was an exciting time from like the medical education perspective, and it was also kind of the only thing that I really had experience in. So that was what I leaned into at that time. Um, and then my first year of residency was, well, I guess kind of like anybody's first year of residency, it's pretty rough in that sense, right? But so I ended up choosing to like or ranking higher on my list, like the community-based setting. So I went to medical school Geisinger, Commonwealth School of Medicine, and I chose to match at a FQHC, like community setting locally. I always kind of felt like, and I still feel this way, that a lot of the change and innovation is going to happen in those community settings. If we're talking about like access to care, affordability, making like a long-term difference, things like that. Cities are maybe strapped for the higher resources that they have, just because of the population of people that they serve. But the more kind of like rural areas don't have resources, and they don't have the newer equipment, and they don't have doctors, and so it kind of like all compounds on itself. And I'd say, but in residency, honestly, like I was not happy like at that time. I don't think I saw the light at the end of the tunnel at all. I think I talked to my co-residents and expected some of the same response that I was getting outside of kind of the clinical world, and I wasn't getting that. And it kind of made me maybe way too jaded, like very early on in terms of
Hmm.
the clinical lens of things. A lot of our docs were like much older doctors that were with us too. Were like kind of half checked out, to be honest, at that point. And
Hmm.
there really wasn't a lot of teaching or the same mentorship that I'd experienced in med school. And also, med school is still a relatively, maybe I doubt I would have said this at that time, like a relatively kind of still creative environment. If you want to run a group, they'll let you do it. If you want to be a part of this committee, they'll let you do it. If you want to like run a club, they'll let you do it. They don't really like care, right? There's kind of like whatever you want to do, like, just study, take your exams, and kind of anything else you want to do, we'll support you. If you want to go to this conference, if you present, we'll pay for it and you can go there. Like, they make it a pretty, really more creative experience, I guess. Like I said, very painful almost for me to say that because going through it, I would not have felt that way. But looking back at
Right.
it, it was. Um, and in residency, I was, it was not something where I felt like connected. to medicine at that time. And I'd
Yep.
always kind of had this entrepreneurial itch, and I didn't really feel like I was making any impact at that time. Hindsight being 2020, it was just, I think, a steep learning curve as well, if I'm going to kind of, be honest with myself about it. And I think I wasn't necessarily prepared at that point for what it was going to bring or what was going to occur at the light at the end of the tunnel. But it was also a shift. Like we've only seen over the last couple of years, a shift towards, I feel like doctors really starting to own, and any clinicians, right? Whether it's physicians, assistants, nurse practitioners, people in other like clinical fields, really start to kind of take ownership again of like the field, right? So after the intern year there, I actually spent some time working back with kind of the doctor's channel and the guys in New York that I initially interned
Mm-hmm.
with. And then there was an opportunity still to, at the Right Center, to join with just one grant, right? So it was a grant, a SAMHSA grant, which is substance abuse, mental health. I forget the exact like acronym that it stands for, but I was gonna be able to work on this grant related to like addiction. And so I was like, you know what, I wanted to transition back towards psychiatry and back into that kind of hospital leadership and see how I could, and if I could, apply some of the clinical skills, excuse me, to kind of the I guess like the non-clinical world. That being said, there's a few caveats I think are important here. That the CEO of the Right Center was and is a practicing physician. So I think that that opened the door to a lot of kind of like creative collaboration that would not
Yeah.
have been necessarily available otherwise. So she was very open to ideas, and the program was struggling in some ways, in terms of just like the attending coverage and how are we going to educate residents. It was a newer program. When I initially joined, it was only the second year, so there was all these like kind of speed bumps along the way, you could say. And so when I went back, it was still kind of an exciting time, right? She wanted to like kind of save the department. And so there was a lot of freedom and flexibility there for what I wanted to do. Um, and that brought me into kind of an area that I've always been passionate about, which is primary care and behavioral health integration. So I started on the grant, and I started to realize that like the psychiatry department was not going to be able to keep up with the demands of like the clinic as a whole. Whereas the Right Center still did over
Hmm.
like 100,000 visits a year. Like it was pretty busy. They had spread across multiple clinics. Like it was not just like an isolated one small community health center. It was pretty relatively large. Um, and so it was like, okay, how are we going to address this demand, right? And that was where I feel like I really started to dive in deeper and just try to like learn as much as I could. And along that same sense, I was trying to connect with people. I was cold outreaching to people on LinkedIn. I still do it, but at that point, it was like multiple times a week, just trying to connect and like
Hmm.
talk to people and, kind of learn like all the things that I didn't know, but also like stumble over myself quite a lot during that
Hmm.
process, which I don't think is unique to me at all. For the doctors that have done this and other clinicians who have done this, it's certainly not like as I'm talking about, I'm like feel like I've heard the same story like over and over again, but that's
Right.
probably because like it is true, right? Like it is
Yep.
not, it really is a lot of stumbling over ourselves, and some of the things in terms of like what I learned and stuff like that I can kind of get into, but just from the original story side of it, I saw needs, and I also realized that like if I was going to be successful, that those needs were going to come in, me meeting the needs were it's going to come in a much different way than residency was going to come, right? Like you can finish a year at a job and no one really cares. Like it's like, okay, you've been here for a year, like I don't know, maybe you get a cake or work or something, but like it's
Sure.
much different, right? It's not like maybe someone says congrats or someone says so sorry for you. It depends where you're working. You know, people may be happy or not, depending. But like in the residency, like when you're done PGY1, you're done PGY1. Oh, now you're PGY2. Now you get these extra little responsibilities, and you
Yeah.
can help teach PGY1s, and like that kind of continues throughout residency. And you have these little like incremental like goals that you meet, and you're like, oh yay, now I get to even call myself something different, right? But I think realizing that was not the case, it was like a almost a constant like it's kind of be a jaded term, but like sales cycle of like myself, my skill set, how I could help the company, and a constant like proof of concept, right? And then not only that, it was also okay, how am I going to motivate other people to kind of come on this little journey with me, who
Yeah.
may have been very happy and comfortable in the role that they had and really don't want to do anything differently.
Yeah.
So those were some of the kind of different aspects of like learning curves that I'd want. I mean, in a hospital, it is still very difficult to motivate people in a clinical setting, but it's still different. There's still kind of a way to do it, and everyone knows, okay, just kind of have to do this, and there can be different motivation sets, I guess. But to do that in the non-clinical setting, when in everyone's perspective, well, everything's running fine. So like, what's the issue? Like, I come to work every day, I do my job. I don't really see what the problem is. Can be very, very difficult. So
Yeah,
that's where some of those real like kind of learning opportunities started to like take off for me, and was also very frustrating at times too.
for sure. So you are approaching this problem probably a little bit more bright-eyed and bushy-tailed than many other people. And you're
Yeah.
trying to kind of bring people on board with you. What
Mhm.
were some of the, I don't want to call them tactics, like we're
Yeah.
talking about like manipulation, but were
Yeah.
there approaches that you found worked better for you than others?
Yeah, I would say honestly, a lot of times I feel like in even like non-clinical roles, but just in healthcare generally, things are still very like top-down approaches. And I noticed that to be the case quite a lot in the kind of the non-clinical roles that I had, maybe partially because it was physician-led, which can be, I think, which is to me like a huge plus,
Yes.
but we still have to be like aware of where that could be a weakness too, you know. So I think some of the tactics was just honestly like sitting down with people and explaining like who I was, like why we were doing this, and then asking them like how I could make their lives easier, like in this process. So really like taking a lot of input and then aggregating it towards like the people that I had to report into as well. Um, and saying like, okay, here's where we're at, here's where we want to be, goal setting, things like that, and really trying to get people more kind of excited around like what they were doing and what those opportunities were and why like some extra pain now will actually result in like an easier like maybe we were fixing kind of an operation or streamlining something, which I know is a very broadly used term, but we certainly did do it, and how that would make it easier in the long run, right? Like in the
Right.
beginning when we're deciding, okay, which tiers of patients don't need to be seen by psychiatry and can be managed on the primary care end. Okay, like how much time is a psychiatrist going to spend per chart? Like how many charts do we want to review? If they're on these X, Y, and Z medicines, we're going to automatically rule those out because that needs to be managed by a psychiatrist. So like going through those things can certainly be painful for all staff, but I said once it was done, it was going to be done. And like that operation is going to be there. And we're just going to do it the same way every single time.
Right.
Um, so that was could be helpful. I was just trying to get people to see the larger picture and also explain at times too that look, this I said it's not going to be fun, but like how can I make your life easier through this process and really trying to like listen um, to what people had for me, and then at the sometimes too it's just kind of absorbing like you're not going to be you're not necessarily going to be liked, but like all the time, which I know is a very cliche thing to say, but it's true. But I do think you need to like be respected and earn people's trust. I don't think that's something that
Yeah.
just comes automatically, right? Kind of as when I walk in to see a patient as I'm a fourth year psychiatry resident now. For the most part, that's relatively respected. I walk in, I have like the authority, I can go see the patient and leave, right? But you still have to earn that trust and respect with the patient individually. Um, but there is still some of that kind of like power differential, right? In that dynamic. Inherently, you shouldn't operate off of that, but it is inherently there. And
Right.
in kind of the corporate world, unless you want literally everybody to hate you, not follow you, not respect you, not trust you, and not like follow through on any of your decisions, you really have to be very much more, even more sensitive, I guess, to that situation. And I would say actually really just sensitive the same way you are with patients, but there's not that inherent respect. Certainly not all patients, you know, a lot of patients still, you know, give pushback, and that's where you have to kind of you kind of settle into like the human side of you and say like, okay, look, what is the barrier here? Like, why are we not connecting, right? But I felt like, it's just that process is even different, like on the non-clinical side of things. Because it's not also like I don't have the things of, well, your life might be at risk or things like that. Like, no, their life's not at risk. Like, they're going to work. Like, their life's not at risk. So it's much different in that scenario, too. You can't say, like, well, if we don't do this, like this and this could happen, and I don't want that to happen
Right.
to you. Is there a family member I could talk to and stuff like that? Like, I'm not calling collateral because someone is like, I don't really believe in that.
Yeah.
So it's much different from that scenario.
Yeah, totally understood. To back it up a little bit, I would love to double click a little bit on your decision
Yeah.
after the first year to leave. It sounds like that transition was fairly smooth in that you left residency and immediately started working on this grant process.
Yeah, so it was smooth-ish. There was so it was not immediate transition to the grant process. I'd gone back and done some kind of work for the guys they were based in New York for that period
Right.
of time. Um, but it was still some time I needed for myself. And I would say, like, emotionally, it was not smooth. I feel like it looked smooth on paper.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you kind of refocusing me on that. Like I said, talk too much, kind of a I guess, from my own end of things. But kind of one of my own flaws there. But it was certainly not emotionally smooth. I think it looks smooth on paper and it'll often be kind of presented that way. And sometimes, a lot of times, when you're looking for a next job or you're presenting yourself briefly somewhere, when you're first meeting someone, they don't really care, honestly, about the emotional side of it so much. I'm not going to sit down with the first time with meeting someone in a 15-minute call or something and be like, let me tell you, like, pull up an emotions wheel and be like, let me tell you how I really felt. Like,
Right.
it's not going to be what's really going to happen, like, in that scenario, right? So it's not often. So I appreciate you kind of going back on that. So it was not emotionally smooth at all for me. I think a lot of it was racked by insecurity, feelings of my own feelings of inadequacy at that point as to, like, how my
Hmm.
clinical skill set was. I feel like part of it was driven by this desire to get into kind of the other side of healthcare, and part of it was also driven by my own insecurities too, right? Like, I do
Hmm.
not feel like I was kind of the same person in a lot of ways then that I am now. And I feel like a lot of that came through some very, very painful growth. So a part of me was very, very excited, but the other part of me was also very scared. Very scared to not be in residency, very scared financially for what was going to occur, very scared relationship wise. Would I ever be able to go back? It wasn't, I mean, at that time, I told myself I'm never going back. Like, that was not like, at that time, I can tell you 110%, I 1,000% believed I am not going back. And there was just no other second thought in my mind. So, like, anytime I worked in some of those other non-clinical roles, I did it with the thought of, like, this is my only opportunity to ever be able to support myself
Mm.
financially.
Hmm.
This is my only opportunity to ever be able to, like, support a family. It's my only opportunity to be able to pay off hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. This is my only opportunity to be able to, like, feel like I've accomplished something, which might seem like something a bit vain, but I think there's also inherently, we all like to kind of feel like we've accomplished something and like we've been successful to some degree. And there's the feelings of telling your family about it, like kind of going to Christmas and it's like, okay, like, and well, I guess I'm Jewish, but I've always gone to the Christmas for half my family. But there's that aspect of it, of sitting around like the table with the family and you're not talking about the things you've been talking about for years and years,
Yeah.
So I think,
Everybody's like, "Oh, how's your residency going?" You're
yeah,
like, "Well."
exactly. And I mean, I have good, I'm fortunate in the sense I have a close family, but I
Hmm.
think, touching on this for another couple minutes is a good idea because I don't think that's talked about often enough. It can seem like a very smooth transition, and some of the emotional side of it is not as touched on. So, I mean, you're
Big
sitting around with
time.
your family, or I'm sitting around one on one with my parents, and they're kind of like, "What are you doing?" And like, "Well, I'm, working on this new project," and they're excited for me. I'm their kid, like they're excited and stuff for me, but it's still like, oh, okay, have you talked to the right center all about like going back to residency, which at points I had, but otherwise I was like, I'm not doing it. Like, not doing it's not happening. I don't want to go back. I think there's a lot more opportunity over here. And some of that at some point becomes kind of like your, like I said, motivating, but also kind of a battle with yourself, as I didn't really know, was I making the right choice? Was I not? I think looking back was something that I had to do, like, for myself in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And then there's, to fast forward real quick and then kind of go back, is that there was the feelings of when I returned, I knew it was the right thing to do as well. I knew
Mm.
that if I was ever going to be able to make differences in the way that I was wanted to make them, and seeing the shift towards like really clinical leadership, that was something that I had to do. And I knew it was something I would never regret. And I told myself, when I go back, like, I'm going to finish no matter what happens. There was also a feeling of inadequacy actually going back. Am I choosing to go back? Am I failing on the other side of it?
Hmm.
And so I was kind of having these internal battles, like both in the very beginning and at the end.
Hmm.
The middle part was kind of the more easier. I could talk about all day. Oh, I did this in this project, and I helped, yeah, increase revenues here, and I, built out like collaborative care models and stuff, and launched across a few clinics, and all those things are true. And we made some money. We got some new contracts. All those things are true. But the middle part, I'd almost describe as some of like the easiest time in a way, because you're just kind of cycling through like new things. But the very beginning was very, very challenging, and really kind of like challenge like who I am and like what I want to be at like a very deep level.
Absolutely.
And I don't even know if I have an answer as to like if I ever really figured that out at that time, to be honest. I don't know, but I do know there was a lot of new stressors and unpredictability. And then when I was going back, I also had started, some of my friends had already started to graduate residency.
Yeah.
And so as I was going into like instability, again, or long-term stability, but like as I was kind of going back into this unknown world for me, I saw people graduating, my friends graduating with stability. And so that was also kind of a very confusing process, right? Like, oh, where are you going to be in attending? What are you going to be doing? And it was a very weird kind of I don't call it an identity crisis, but I'd say I had a lot of like mixed emotions. I didn't always feel confident at that moment.
For sure. Did you consider at all, like, did you ever have feelings where the idea of like the sunk cost fallacy came up of, you invested all of this time, all of this money, all of this effort, all of
Mhm.
these conversations, all of the early mornings and late nights
Mhm.
into med school, into
Yeah.
residency, poured your heart into this thing, and the choice to walk away leaves all of that on the table.
Yeah, certainly. And like I felt the weight of that, especially leaving. So I had ultimately had jobs that I went throughout those few years that I did make more money, just if we're talking about from a purely financial standpoint. In the very, very beginning, I was making
Right.
less than I did in residency, actually. So I absolutely
That's
like,
tough.
yeah. So I actually felt that like very, very, I felt that quite a lot. I think
Yeah,
part of it was, like I said, the CEO of the Right Center and I had maintained a very good relationship throughout that period. But I think part of her also wanted me to go back too, and it was kind of like, well, I'll support you in this, but like you're starting from like the bottom here, like. You know what I mean? Like you're gonna feel the weight of this decision. Like I will
yeah.
support you through it, but like you're gonna feel the weight of this decision, and I'm gonna make you earn it every single step of the way, and which is the right thing to do. But
Mhm.
that being said, like I felt it for sure. I didn't know like would I be able to pay off this debt. I didn't know like even just not even from just the financial standpoint of just like all the time you put into it. I think back to like when I was like a freshman in college, I'm like, late night studying for like a biology exam or whatever. And like, at that time, like the only thing I could picture was getting into medical school. Like that was it.
Exactly.
And that was my only focus. I mean, I did some clubs here and there. I did the volunteering and other things I had to do, but at the end of the day, like nothing got in the way of like me making sure like I did well on the tests and all of that. And so part of me like wondered, like I was like, what, like what's going on here? Like what? I don't know. Do I owe it to like my younger self as well to continue to push forward? Am I just quitting? Am I just giving up on something? Am I uh, doing something truly different, or am I just kind of giving up on myself? Which one is it? And honestly, I don't even know. Like today, if you were to ask me, I don't even necessarily know. But I can certainly say like both of those feelings were there at the same time. And then,
Yeah.
like I said, going back to residency, then it was a point where I was making a lot more, and then I went back to making less, and there was some of the same feelings of like, am I giving up on this other part of me that I kind of want to continue to feed, or am I actually feeding something that's like needs to kind of be fed because it's always been there, and this is me finishing what I started, and like which one is more important to me and what do I want to do? And ultimately, like I had to kind of push that all out of my head. And then there was, I'd say in terms of like sunk costs, I was like, did I just waste like 4 years of my life doing absolutely nothing?
Sure. Yeah.
Like I don't think that's the case. But like in that moment when you're like signing your contract again, you're stepping back into the clinical side of things, you're getting your license again and all of that. Like I was
Yep.
like, did I just waste all this time? Like what if I had just gone through? I could have done this later, or I don't know. Am I making the right choice? Like did I set myself up socially, even like for starting a family someday or doing other things that I wanted to do in my life? Like what was, is this all for nothing? Is it for something? Like, what am I going to do? And I think at this point, I've kind of worked through a lot of those kind of, or I've been able to carry at least both of those things at the same time. Some of those mixed feelings that you get, but in the beginning it was very, very challenging. And I'd say kind of that first winter that I went through, I was in Scranton, Pennsylvania, right for my residency, and I kind of halfway through my PGY2 year was like not the best, at that point in time. Clinically, I was doing fine. I was able to catch up and I studied hard and I was able to kind of get myself back up to speed. And I had some really good attendings that put a lot of energy into teaching all of us. So I was okay. I felt like from that front, I felt like I was learning. I felt like I was okay. I felt then the weight of like finishing it again. And I was like, oh my
Yeah.
God. I was like, I still have 2.5 more years left. I had to take step
Yep.
3 again. So I was a couple months away from like taking step three. So I was studying for that. It's cold outside. It's snowing. Like everything just feels like intense. And then I'm like, man, I got to do this like for another 2.5 years. How am I going to do that? But I made that just like I committed that I was going to give everything I could when I was out of residency. I decided once I went back, I was like, no matter what happens, I will finish because I just
Okay.
knew like in my like heart of hearts that that was the right thing to do. And I think part of that too
Yeah.
was like a sense of not finishing what I had started. Um, I was like, if 10 years from now, 20 years or whatever, I never want to be a psychiatrist again. I said, fine. I said, but like, I was thinking about myself too, like as an older, like when I'm 80 years old, like, do I want to look back and have never, ever, like, been able to treat another patient, like, ever, ever? You know, do I
Yep.
maybe just want to do it like one time a week? Like, I don't know, like, what is it? But do I want to really, really close that door completely? And that
Right.
was where I started to realize, like, the wedge that, like, we as clinicians have, right? Like, no matter what, someone could go and read all of the books about psychiatry that they could, and they might know the receptors better than I do, and they might, have read up more on esketamine than I did, but it doesn't matter. I still did the thing, and I can practice psychiatry.
Yep.
And I realized that like all the things that were going to come that I would learn through that experience, which I had to also accept that like I was not going to learn all of them right away. I wouldn't even know like the skills that I developed through it. I just kind of had to suck it up and go through it and be willing to like reflect back on it later because there was a kind of a, I don't know, like there was temptation throughout it, right? Like our program closed and I had to find a new program. So that was a lot of work. That was another opportunity where I could have just stepped away.
Absolutely.
I finished step three at that point. I was there. I would have still been like a fully licensed doctor, at least in like some states. I could have gotten a license.
Right.
So that was kind of
Yep.
another opportunity where it's like you could step away right now if you want to. But at that point, I had like fully committed to doing it. If for nothing else other than like I promised myself that that's what I was going to do at that time.
For
So
sure.
I think that's what I needed to continue to kind of grind through it.
Yeah. So your program closes
Hmm.
and
Yeah, so I knew they were closing about halfway-ish through the year at that point. So in my second year, and actually my
yeah.
grandfather passed away during my second year too, who was also
Oh my
like a
God.
big inspiration for me going into medicine. I
Yeah.
mean, he was older, and so it's not like it was expected. He had been sick for some time. It wasn't like a out of the blue thing, but nevertheless, it still always hurts, right? So, I
Absolutely.
kind of lost him, and then had to take step three. Which if I also didn't pass step three, I wouldn't have kind of mattered anyway. I would have had to retake that, right? You can't move forward in training without that. Um, and so, there was kind of a lot of like temptations around of like kind of giving up, it felt like at that point, right? I kind of lost like my main motivator for it. I felt like, but I also saw how excited he was for me to go back. Um, the grinding of studying for step three, the program closing, I said, which I knew sometime around the halfway point in the second year. I don't remember exactly when it was that we like officially heard, but we knew we'd be able to finish our year. We knew we'd be able to do that. So the ACGME basically said once everyone finishes that year, that's like when the end is. If someone's off cycle, on cycle, it didn't really matter. They let you finish that year. So that's when I started looking around at programs, and it's kind of interesting experience actually. I actually had probably gotten more interviews when the program closed than I initially did coming out of medical school. Um,
Sure.
so I had kind of like a wide range of options. It was kind of really weird position to be in because I went from a position where I was actually very nervous about it, of course, right? Like, what am I going to do? um, to actually interviewed at places that like I would have never been able to interview at previously. If
Feel
you're
like
talking about like
somebody
a
already vetted you.
yeah, if you're talking about like a purely academic standpoint, like I would not have been
Sure.
able to touch some of the organizations that got back to me. I was like,
Yeah.
who just replied to me? I was like, they want to talk. I was like, do they want something from me? I was like, money? I don't know. Not that I had it, but I was. It almost felt like they like must need something. I don't know, because it was like there's no way they're actually interviewing me for like this position. So it was a very weird experience. Um, but it kind of leaned on for me. Maybe it just made me feel better. I don't know, but I kind of leaned on saying, okay, this is maybe a sign that I'm doing the right thing, right? Like going back was the right thing to do. Look at all these opportunities that you have. One of them that was going to be a particularly cool opportunity, I would have unfortunately had to wait an extra year to go to. They were starting kind of a new track as part of their like conglomerate. They're very large training institution in a big city, and so they were starting this new track. And it was like they said, "We'll accept you for the new track, but you have to wait a year." And I kind of mulled that back and forth for a while. And I interviewed at one place actually back closer to my parents' house. And I actually told them no, I just didn't like them. And I said no. And you're never really in that position. So it's actually a very
Mm-hmm.
weird position to be in. Everyone looks at it as like the world's coming to an end. And I actually had some
Mm-hmm.
options, which was kind of cool. because yeah, I guess someone already vetted me, so I ultimately settled on a program in upstate New York. And that was kind of another weird moment. It was like, do I go for like a name brand organization I have to
Sure.
wait a year for? But also, do I trust myself to wait a year? Right? Like, what happens if I leave again?
Yep.
And am I compromising myself like during that year? And it felt like, I didn't believe I would, but it just didn't feel worth the chance. And then
Yep.
talking about sunk cost, it was like, what am I going to do during that year? I mean, I could do some research or something. There's not much. I could work for another company for a little bit. Most companies don't want to hire you only for a year. Say,
Yep.
oh, get involved in our company and do all this work, but only for a year. Usually not what happens unless you already are someone who does a lot of that kind of contracting stuff. So I chose the program up here in Utica, New York, which have been very happy with. It's an incredibly busy program. We're kind of the only hospital within like an hour. That's kind of the main hospital here, so it's very, very busy. And I came in as a senior resident because myself and another guy from the program both came here, and we came here as third years, and they didn't have any fourth years, so we were the
Hmm.
senior class, which was kind of a interesting experience as well. Um, and yeah, I made that move. But there was quite a lot of times where you kind of feel like tested like along the way, and you have to like really
Absolutely.
stay honest with yourself as to like what you're doing and why you're doing it. And I think that becomes a very challenging thing when people leave medicine or they stay in it, right? Sometimes they stay in it for the wrong reasons, and that's not the right thing to do either. And sometimes you leave it for the wrong reasons, and it becomes very, very challenging to stay honest with yourself like throughout that process.
I was gonna say some of the most truly inspiring and like you can just tell that they're really from the heart, the right decisions that people who I've interviewed for this podcast or just had general conversations with when we're talking about that transition from medicine to something else.
Hmm.
When you see that it truly comes from their heart and like it is truly just aligned with their belief system, their value system, it is always the right decision.
Hmm.
But when
Yeah.
they are not acting in alignment with their beliefs, with their values, and they're still just pushing forward, there's a huge disconnect there. So the fact that you
Yeah.
were able to really look internally and say like, okay, what do I really need to do? What really feels the most aligned for me? Not like what would be the best thing to do, so to speak.
Yeah.
Some people would value a name brand over, and waiting an extra year, and that might be right for them, but you knew in your heart of hearts that like you needed to just get this done. You needed to keep
Hmm.
the train moving forward. Don't hop off the train again, and let's go put our
Yeah.
head down, go.
And one thing that has kind of been, I've realized kind of throughout this period too, is that like when I've done it off of what I know in my heart I need to do instead of like the right thing to do, there's always been something that kind of one way or another kind of like fed the other side, right? Like it was like a couple months before I moved that I got in touch with Rebecca early on for Scrub Collaborative and, initially like Dr. ZVC. So it was at that point that I actually got involved with that, was able to kind of help with some of those early stages of gear turning and stuff, which is very, very cool. So that was something where it just like reassured me, like continue to follow like what you know is right,
Right.
and also continue to follow what's not always going to be like, it wasn't, I didn't choose it because of this, but it was not certainly like the most fun thing to do. I joke like I moved from like Scranton to Scranton, like, and I don't know if you've been to Scranton before, but like where the office is based, and I didn't realize, I
Yep.
never watched the office that much, but apparently they had like another like hub in Utica. They had like a satellite office in Utica that someone told me, and I was like
Are you
in
kidding?
the show. So I was like, there's no way. I literally just moved from Scranton to Scranton. And that's what it felt like. I was like, there's no way. Or like the closest city is over an hour away. And like,
Right.
you're just kind of there. And like, it was kind of funny. But it also reassured me too that like practicing in those very, very challenging settings is like, was also something that it was kind of just the right like fit for me
Yeah.
there as well. Cause there's times where I leave work and I like really like I'm like I don't like hate it, but I'm just like exhausted, right? I'm just like exhausted from it, and I kind of have to reel myself back in and be like, "Is this like kind of what you wanted? Like, would you be happy somewhere else?" And then kind of the internal dialogue of like, "No, I actually wouldn't." Like, and it's not
Yep.
like and I don't feel by any means I'm being some martyr working there. If anything, I feel like it's a selfish thing because I just enjoy it more, being in those
Yep.
settings. Um, and going back to kind of being honest with myself, I say when I left residency, there was a lot of things I had to be honest with myself about, um, too, and it wasn't just the professional side of things, also where I was at, like personally, socially, things of that nature. I wasn't healthy during my intern year. I wasn't taking care of myself in a lot of ways. that previously I kind of had in medical school. And I think it challenged me and challenged like kind of some of my own ego strength at that point, in that time period, which is not something I'd anticipated. You go through med school, you're kind of doing all right. You're looking around, you're like, well, I'm doing fine. I'm going through, like, I wasn't top of my class, but I was doing just fine in learning and stuff. And I realized I was not like caring for myself at that point. And I wasn't doing what was right for me either. And it wasn't like in some self-care thing. It was more of I really was just at like an emotional low point too. So I left residency. I also ended up, I had lost a bunch of weight at that point. I'd tried to get myself like mentally and physically kind of like stronger so in the future I could kind of reapproach like challenging situations with maybe confidence, yes, but more like the confidence that like I know no matter what comes at me, I'll be able to get through it. And I think before I got to that kind of place, I went through a lot. I experienced quite a lot of like imposter syndrome and feeling insecure throughout the process of medical school, even and summer residency. And going back to residency really kind of re-challenged me on all of those
Sure.
things. Then I looked around and I was approaching things differently than I had before too. And I was just like, I don't know, I was just tried to make myself even more like hungry for learning than I had
Yeah.
previously. And I tried to pick up like as many patients as I could. And try to see like as much as I could. And like I try to leave every day like exhausted, and just because I knew like this, wanted to stay like I said, kind of like mentally strong through that and like show myself like this was something that I could get through. So again, always this kind of balancing act of like an insecurity, a confidence, a desire to do something, kind of a lifelong dream, proving it to yourself, but also like a strong desire just to accomplish it and do something good. And I enjoy working with psychiatry patients. So you're kind of holding these like multiple emotions at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, I think that that's a very common thread for many of us, and I appreciate you for being so just matter of fact and human and sharing this story. I think a lot of us might not share. People sometimes have this guard around themselves and they don't want
Mhm.
to, lay out these insecurities that you're talking
Mhm.
about when they're really talking matter of factly about a situation. So I hugely appreciate you giving some deeper insight into what that whole process was like for you,
Yeah.
because it is certainly not easy for anyone in any field, especially not in medicine.
Yeah. I appreciate
Before
the
we
opportunity.
keep moving forward,
Yeah.
I would love to hear more also about your time as a venture fellow. I
Yeah. I
know
was just
that
actually going to
we
touch on that.
really briefly touched on you
Mhm.
getting in touch with Rebecca. And for the listeners, David and I got connected through a group called Scrub Collaborative, formerly Clinicians Who VC, which is a venture group that is run by clinicians and it focused primarily on healthcare and health tech businesses and startups. So you have a prior experience
Mhm.
during your gap years of
Mhm.
working as a fellow, and I'd love for you to kind of give more insight for the audience into like what that really looks like, what were you really doing, trying to get into less of the buzzword part
Sure.
of things
Yeah.
and
Sure.
really just kind of laying it out for us.
Sure. Yeah. So I will say it was awesome. Like I loved it,
Yeah.
but I had tried like for probably about a year solid to land a venture fellowship, if not a bit longer. I
Okay.
tried for about a year to land one, and I mean, I had like absolutely no idea what I was doing. Not only did I like have zero experience in venture, I talked to a ton of startups just kind of through like networking and stuff like that. And so I talked very frequently with a lot. I had done little like mini advising things here and there and stuff like that, and kind of giving my input and 2 cents and whatever. But I really hadn't done anything like formal. I'd had some of this kind of like creative experience at the Right Center, kind of on the operator side. But again, really nothing formal, no formal training, no business connections, like literally like nothing. But I just kept like trying and trying and trying and trying to learn about as much as I could. And so then what I started doing is just try to like research as much as I could, as much as I could. And finally, I had gotten in touch with the fund that I had done the fellowship with Architect, and took a few months to of kind of working back and forth. And really what I did is I would just kind of send them like my own little analysis of things, of companies I would find and say, hey, maybe you'd be interested in this one. Hey, maybe you'd be interested in this one. And, I'd heard that they would be starting, having venture fellows and stuff. And it wasn't really anything like concrete yet. There's no application open, whatever. It said they'll be posting it on LinkedIn. And so I would just email them opportunities in my own little analysis, which for the record were absolutely terrible analysis. They were not good. Nothing I sent them they invested in. Nothing I sent them probably made sense. Nothing
Know
I sent
thyself.
them, I had zero clue, like what it was, but each time I did feel like I got like a little bit better, but I still had really
Okay.
kind of any idea what I was doing, in the
Yeah,
scheme of
sure.
things, somewhere to look at it who has had experience in the field. But they opened up the fellowship. I checked every single day on LinkedIn, applied, emailed them again, kind of kept in touch, and landed that fellowship with them. They ended up doing actually for a couple of years with them, which is awesome. And I'm very, grateful I had the opportunity to kind of learn in that setting
Mhm.
and learn like what goes into actually analyzing a company and
Mhm.
what goes into okay some of the numbers and stuff. I mean, you can Google it and learn what like venture scale is, and you can crunch the numbers into an Excel sheet and kind of be like, oh, okay, I project to make this much. I wouldn't say that's really there's not that hard science behind it, the number, the finance side. You can just kind of research and learn. But and I started to read some books on it and things like that, and as I went through it, I started to realize I was like, wait a second. I was like, maybe like the psychiatry thing like could come in handy here. I was like, because a lot of it is betting on like people, and especially if they were pre-seed and seed, right? And so sometimes they were sometimes they were pre-revenue. They were literally like a concept. Sometimes they were investing in.
Yeah.
They're very very early stage for the most part, and so it was a lot more about the team and the people and things like that. So once I started to think in that perspective, that's when I started to I think get better at like filtering out deals and providing analysis. And I still had to learn like okay, you're like go to market and why and how do we think they're going to get there, analyze the space and all the buzzwords that I won't bother throwing out. You still have to do all those things, but that was achievable. I could learn that. But I really realized though is if I was going to be successful in that, I had to know how to connect with people. I had to know how to be reliable. I had to know how to be actionable fast. If there's a deal closing, you have to be available, so it was really making that like a priority of mine, and I really did love that side of it. And also
Yeah.
like proving your value, right? Like, okay, like are people starting to inbound send you things, now? And you're not just trying to outbound source, different deals, which did start to happen. And do you trust the team that is launching this? And why do you think they could be successful? Do you think their personalities align with like someone that could get a company to a stage where even if they would ultimately replace themselves, let's say, with someone who has more experience as a CEO, like, are they able to recognize that they need to do that? What are all these things that are going to make this be able to be functional? Someone that can take advice and lead at the same time.
Yeah.
So I really started to kind of hyper focus on that arena of it. And that was where I kind of found like my like niche. That was where I found like I could add value was on that side of it. And that was pretty cool because it started to really align. And I think in a weird way too, like it kind of got me re in touch with like psychiatry as well. Um,
Absolutely.
kind of almost like re-put me back in touch with the clinical side. Almost started to make me like in the background, like that's when I started to really think actually, like maybe I should go back. You know what I mean? Like, what if I were to do
Yeah.
something like this myself someday? And a large part of too, I'd say the venture fellowship was like again, kind of like keeping my own ego in check that like it's going to be a journey. Like no one's going to trust you to invest like millions or billions of dollars, like just because like maybe you can speak effectively or because you did it for a year. Like that's not really how it works,
Yep.
So you have to really like each time like build trust with people and earn your respect. You have to earn trust, really. I wouldn't say build, I'd say earn it. You have to earn people's
Yep.
trust, you have to earn people's respect. And you have to recognize that it's going to be kind of a bumpy road sometimes. And also at the end of the day, that like I can show why I think maybe someone with psychiatry experience would be valuable in the venture space. But me just showing up and saying I'm a psychiatrist is going to do absolutely nothing because I'm not like putting the story together. I'm not making it make sense. I'm not tying it into like prior experience. And I think that's sometimes where when doctors they have all the skills, but they don't know like exactly how to translate it
Yep.
into like that space. And I see that's where some of the disconnect and difficulty comes in from that side of it. But yeah, my time as a venture fellow, avoiding kind of buzzwordy stuff was a lot of fun. I would highly recommend it. It was very challenging in a lot of good ways. And it taught me just how much like this is cliche sounding, but like just how much like I didn't know. And like I know it's a very cliche thing to say, but like I can tell you like when I was just repeatedly on weekends and evenings and during work just like looking at these things and looking and then just getting a nope, not something we're interested in, nope, not something we're interested in. Well, okay, let's call them. Oh, nope. Why do you think we wouldn't be interested? Like when you're just constantly getting like hearing no's yourself, that's when you really feel kind of the weight of like what you actually didn't know. It's not
Yeah.
just like I learned so much that I didn't know. It's like no, you're getting like repeatedly like you feel like mentally like beaten with like things that
Yep.
like you should have known and you didn't. And that can be very challenging.
This is like a key difference that I have identified in people who work in medicine versus people who work elsewhere in the world.
Mhm.
In the medical field, at least at the provider level or like senior nurse level, people say yes to us all the time.
Mhm.
And a lot of the times, our judgment is the most senior in the room. So the
Mhm.
decisions that we make and the things that we say almost aren't question not question in
Yeah.
terms of not being safe for a patient, but it's kind of like, okay, yeah, well, like what you say goes. And like we're giving orders, we're,
Mhm.
starting meds, we're telling the patient what we think, what our assessment is. And of course, we have that pushback at times, but it's not that frequent. As far as a non clinical job where you are starting at the bottom of the totem pole again, you
Mhm.
are like constantly receiving no's, you're just, like you said, getting beaten down all the time. You have to really accept that you are far from the smartest person in the room.
Mhm.
And I think that that is a huge potential challenge for clinicians who are wanting to transition to a more non clinical role to
Yeah.
overcome.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. And it's something that I guess it's like where I say it could be applicable from the clinical skill set is it's like how badly do you want it, right? If you want to be a doctor badly enough, you'll go to college and you will study and you will go to medical school and you'll do all those things and then you'll go to residency and if you want to be in any clinical role, whatever it is, right? If you want to be a physician assistant, if you want to be a nurse, you want to be a PT, anything in that like clinical realm, like there's a lot of work that goes into it and if you want to do those things, yeah, there's a lot of work that goes into it. So it becomes like a how badly do you want it thing. But just
Yeah.
because you did the thing over here doesn't necessarily guarantee you that someone's going to say, well, you can do that thing over here. And I think that does become like a difficult kind of pill to swallow. It's like, well, I've been doing it for so long. It doesn't really matter because like there's applicable skill sets, but they're still different. And I guess maybe it's easier for us to swallow those things in a totally unrelated industry, right? Like if you ask me, like, I don't know, like fix a car, like it's not going to happen. Like there's zero chance that I'm going to be successful at that.
Sure.
Like at least not easily, and it's going to take me way longer and break way more things in the process. But I can absorb that. I'm like, well, yeah, I'm just not good at fixing cars or whatever. I couldn't build a house, but it's very easy for me to just say that. It doesn't really require, I feel like, much humility because it's like, well, everyone's like, well, yeah, you never did that. It's like, but this is in healthcare, so shouldn't we already know like how to fix it? Shouldn't we already know like what the right answers are? And so I think it becomes a lot harder to kind of swallow that. But I would say it's still worth it. Um, and the venture side of it, there's a lot of no's, and I realized also kind of how big but small the world is too, which was a surprise for me as well. Um,
Yeah.
so that was kind of just kind of a different like tidbit that I had learned about, but um, it is very hard to translate that, and I'm sure if you've experienced some of the same thing, right? Like launching a podcast and doing other things, right? There's things that are certainly applicable in terms of like the work ethic and the grind behind it and stuff like that. But there's still so much new information like you have to learn, and the other tough that I think becomes hard to pill to swallow is that like I did study venture for, I studied it, like I researched it, I studied it, I read books, I did those things, and it still only got me so far, and there's still a lot more that I still had to learn. And so it's like if you read a book on like, I don't know, if I can learn everything there's to know about Prozac, I know how to apply it, I know how to like give the medication, whatever, how to titrate it up and down, and I learn the thing and I do it. There's not really much else to it once you learn it. But there's the soft skills of making sure patients take and, try to adhere to medication so they get better, things like that. But, there was still so much left. And then even
Yeah.
when you do know everything, there's still a lot more uncertainty and unpredictability, and you're still going to get told no, a lot of times. And I agree that's something that's not often. You're right. You kind of walk into a patient room, you are more the authority, right? And you're not, even if you're in like charge, you're still going to be told no a lot of times in kind of the other world. It just may be by some outside factor, that you didn't really
Totally.
anticipate. And that becomes like it can be a hard thing to balance, but it can also be kind of like exciting too, because you kind of want to like, well, I do want to learn. I want to get the yes.
Yeah. Makes the arc more interesting.
Yeah.
Do you see venture in your future?
It is something that I would like to kind of, I guess, arc into, you could say, in the future. It's something I really, really enjoyed. I really enjoyed the process of like, I don't know, getting to dive deep in these deals, getting to meet like different people, work with them, and figure out, okay, like how could someone in the venture side of it continue to kind of inspire, lead, help like founders from that perspective too.
Mhm.
How can you like help motivate teams of people in kind of this unique way? So that I think is an end of it that I like a lot. Kind of how can you use some of the what's the psych component of it, right? Like how can you kind of motivate, lead, learn about people? Because I feel like a lot of the roadblocks that come up for companies is a more of a people thing. And I know again that's cliche and it's talked about a lot. No, it's the people that matter. It's the people that matter. And sure, yes, we all know that inherently, but like doing that is a challenge, right? And we see that with patients like every day, or with patients like working with people on that level. It's just, it kind of brings you almost to that same I feel like it's similar. It's a similar feeling, I guess, that I get. Like when
Yep.
I'm working with a patient and we can kind of work together towards like coming up with something. And I'm not comparing patients to founders. Maybe that won't go along great for me. I don't know. But like there's a similar mindset of how can you kind of motivate, inspire, and like work with people. And to me, that's what I find very exciting. And then also how can you start to like identify trends and things
Yeah.
like that. But yeah, it's something
Motivational
in the
interviewing
future.
for founders.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. I guess something like that. Yeah. So it's something that I would like to do. In the future, that being said, uh, it'll take time, and that's something that I'm okay with. And
Yeah.
um, in the process, I want to continue to just build as many skill sets as I can. And like I said, my main focus right now, until graduation, of course, has been residency, but I still stay involved kind of in the other components as much
Yeah.
as possible, but hyper focusing on everything I can learn from this experience. So I was like, I don't want to be like half good at a half good psychiatrist and half good
Mhm.
someone in venture and half good, you know what I mean? I really want to
Mhm.
try to like absorb as much as possible. That being said, I have a shift later today, and it's a lot easier for me to say this than when it is later on like, oh, you have another consult, you have a new consult. Like I won't feel
Yeah.
that way in like 8 hours, but like right now, in that moment, but when it's all said and done, it feels good.
Yeah. So right now, your primary focus is just putting one foot in front of the other to finish out your residency, and you have how much longer?
Yeah, so from I kind of left, went back. I have about, and I'll technically finish the end of August from like when the program closed and going back and the transfer and stuff like that, making sure I checked all the boxes. I'll finish the end of August. Yeah.
Fantastic. That's so soon.
Yeah, it is pretty soon. It feels on one hand not soon, on another hand, like because it's still again, I'm in upstate New York right now. It's winter. It's very
I
cold.
was gonna say you're not in Pennsylvania, but upstate New York winters are probably pretty similar.
Yeah, it's not worse in terms of the snow and cold and things
Right.
like that. So, it can certainly be a bit of a slog. And from last week to this
Yeah.
week, I'm on kind of an 11-day work stretch, and so that gets tiring. And I still though, I make that my main focus and priority in terms of I think I owe it to myself, I owe it to patients to like,
Yeah.
do that. But I still, it's not like I've put down like, you know, doing my first podcast or like, put down like staying involved with Scrub Collaborative and staying engaged in the Slack community and things like that. So I'm doing it in some of those ways, but I'm
Yep.
not like cold outreaching like crazy like I would have at one point. Just,
Sure.
I'm making connections kind of as I go. But yeah, I'm making my main focus, the residency side of it. And I take my boards at the beginning of September. So
Mhm.
I'll do that as well, the psychiatry board. So I'll do that too. And that's obviously been like a main focus
Mhm.
prioritizing some of the personal things. I'm getting married in June as well, so there's a lot of like prioritizing some of the
Nice.
personal
Congrats.
life. Thank you. Yeah, some of the personal
Yes.
life side of things as I go through it. And my fiance is now actually in a school psychology program. To be a school psychologist, so kind of corner the market a little bit in the, the psych end of things,
You
but
guys are a dream team. Oh my goodness.
corner the psych market. No, it's so prioritizing those things, of course, as well throughout this process. But like on the
Yeah.
professional side of things, yeah, really just kind of putting one foot in front of the other. And I will say though, this is a bit tangential, but on the still professionally related, I did start. Well, it's just kind of sitting there right now because I haven't graduated yet. But in terms of when I finish residency, I plan to only contract with hospitals. I do not plan to take a W-2 job, and
I
that's
was
to allow
wondering
me.
if
Yeah,
you had plans to work clinically, if
yeah,
you were thinking that far ahead or not. So it sounds like, yes, your intention is to
yeah.
work clinically, only doing
hmm
contract. Are we talking like locums work?
Yes, but I'm kind of planning on making my own locums, you could say, in terms of, so I
Mhm.
set up, it's fully filed now, it's registered. I set up my own like PLLC in New York, which was also kind of its own learning curve in itself.
I'm
Um,
sure.
I did it through basically just researching like how to do it and whatever. Made a couple mistakes along the way. It took me some time, but it's there. So I plan to do it through that, kind of learning about some of this, the business end of it. What is the difference between like filing as
Mhm.
an S corp versus pass through taxes, that
Mhm.
kind of thing. But I plan to do it in that way. I've had some like W-2 offers and stuff, and I've just come back and said I'm only interested in hourly work. So
Hmm.
basically negotiating myself directly with the hospital, and because
Yep.
in that way, I think you build like a more direct relationship, which I think can be helpful. You can also make yourself at a more competitive rate than the locums because you're not taking a piece off the top, right? Like the
Certainly.
locums companies do. So I'm just kind of going in, yeah, basically myself negotiating with them, but it'll be through like the PLLC that I do, and a large part of that is that way kind of legally like you can carve things out and have like a 90-page contract with a hospital. It's not really something I'm interested in doing. I'd rather say these are the hours I'm working for you, and the rest of the time is fully owned by me.
Sure.
That's that way, if I do any kind of investing stuff, I do anything, kind of other jobs or even whatever it is, right? Like I
Yeah,
own that time. And I wanted those
totally.
boundaries to be incredibly concrete and incredibly clear.
That's a very wise way to keep yourself still open for opportunity, like other opportunities to
Yeah,
arise, rather than potentially getting swallowed whole by clinical work.
yeah. And I think a big way of doing that is this is more, I guess, on like the finance side of it, but we have kind of a plan of like I don't plan, we've established how kind of we live in residency and stuff like that, and like I don't see my lifestyle changing in any
Yeah.
time soon,
Yep.
which is a bit odd because I do see a lot of my friends' lifestyles starting to kind of grow quite a lot.
Yep.
Um, Either I have some friends that you know graduated college and got a job. So they've been in the workforce for like 12 years, 15 years, whatever it is. And so like just by the nature of like them working for so many years, right? They're at a different place. And then some of my friends that have already graduated as attendings and been working for a few years and things like that. So it's another piece of kind of like realigning like what is important to me at this moment and what will be
Right.
important to me in the future. And that can be hard to ask yourself, but to go into a contracting role where I could have like the best hourly rate for 6 months and they say, oh, sorry, we found a full-time employee, goodbye, so you have to be prepared for those things to happen, kind of
Definitely.
psychologically and financially. That's just kind of another important tidbit that I think can be overlooked. We crave autonomy and we also crave stability at the same time. And I think those two things sometimes clash with each other a little bit. So for me, I'm leaning on autonomy and kind of making they're not really sacrifices, like missing anything in my life, but like you could say like sacrifices in other areas.
Sure. Absolutely. I mean, you've definitely made a lot of sacrifices along your professional and like educational journey. It only makes sense to extend those out a couple more years, I think.
Yeah, and it's kind of at this point, like I have had a lot of unpredictability in the past. I have gone through that, and so at this point, it's more just like, yeah, whatever,
Yeah,
it's fine. Like I'm able to navigate that unpredictability better. If something happens, I'll get
definitely.
if I land a really awesome clinical job for a while, and then they hire someone W-2, so they get rid of me because I'm kind of like a locums person in a way.
Yeah.
That's fine. Like I'll go from there. Like, I'll figure it out.
Yep.
But that took a lot of time to kind of get to the place I'm in now. And I think, like I said, I crave a lot of that autonomy. And so I think what it was for me, I think a lot of what I was craving, I like clinical care. I actually like working kind of the CPAP or emergency psych setting quite a lot. So I'll probably do some of that kind of work. I like kind of meeting patients in those crisis moments.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I realized I think I always thought it was clinical care that I was kind of at odds with. And I think what I really was missing was like autonomy. And I realized that like I do enjoy clinical care. Is it something that I see myself doing 40 hours a week, 50 hours a week forever? No, I don't. But like, it really wasn't ever clinical care that like drove me crazy or bothered me so much. It
Yep.
was a lack of autonomy. And so I've learned to kind of find that within clinical care and then kind of in like the outside world. But it took me a while to realize that that's what it was. I just had all the emotions kind of mixed up into clinical care and almost these like resentments I had towards like practicing clinically, that I had to really identify like what is it that I'm actually missing? Because going to work and being a psychiatrist is really a pretty cool job. I mean, I walk into the ER, someone's like actually psychotic or really depressed or whatever it is. It's a pretty cool job. You get to meet people in these like really kind of difficult situations in their life that most people only get to watch on TV, and you get to be there with them in those moments. So it really is a very cool job. But I didn't realize that what I was missing was autonomy. So like, how do I find that within clinical work? And it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be an all or nothing scenario. It can be create a PLLC, sit in some of that unpredictability that can be brought on by being self-employed, and also do like the the clinical work. And through that, I hope to learn more like negotiation and all those things that'll come along with doing that. And again, more no's, right? Like, oh, we're not going to do that. We'll just wait it out. We already have one person that we overwork downstairs.
Sure.
They're salaried. We're not worried. Like,
Yep.
we'll just wait it
Yep.
out. So you go through all those things.
Yeah. And along the lines of, evaluating what the true reasons for maybe not wanting to continue clinically or not loving clinical practice,
Hmm.
if someone is thinking about leaving residency, leaving medicine altogether, or just really pivoting, what are the things that you might encourage them to think more about?
Sure. So I actually have spoken to some residents over the years where someone's known someone say, hey, they're thinking about leaving. They're having a tough time or whatever the reason is, right? Some medical, some whatever. Um, and have come to me and I've told them all, I said, if you need to take like a leave of absence or something like that, I said, do that. I said, don't leave. I said, it's really like, having gone through it, I said, it really kind of sucks. Um, because I was so dead set and then getting back, I was able to do it, but there was no guarantee that I could. I maintained a good relationship with them and I was able to do it, but there was zero guarantee. And the only way back in is the way you left. So like, if for whatever reason the right center said no, I wouldn't have been able to go back, right?
Mhm.
Because anywhere else you would apply, they're going to want a letter of reference from them. And if they just decide,
Mhm.
no, we don't really feel like supporting you anymore or whatever, you're out. So I just want people to kind of recognize the gravity of that situation, that like this was I was able to make it work, but like I don't wish upon anybody kind of the emotional like pain and frustration that I went through those years, the weight that I carried with me, the insecurities, the unsureness, all the things that I kind of
Yep.
carried with me, the reality that like I would actually never be able to see a patient again in that situation. I guess theoretically, sure, you get licensed or whatever. No one's really going to hire you with 1 year of experience as an intern. You know what I mean? The reality
Right.
is you're not. That's the reality of the situation. So like, I want people to really absorb that gravity of that situation and recognize what that like truly, truly means. Because I did live through it, and it's not something I recommend at all. I think people who like maybe leave medical school and take some break, even that's very risky. They probably have
Yeah.
a slightly better chance. You're not already committed to like one residency organization, but still, I think it's very challenging. And I think recognizing the gravity of that, recognizing, and I didn't really have a financial safety net. It was just kind of me. And there's a lot of sacrifices. And I look back and it was kind of crazy decisions that, you know, I did honestly in some way, like objectively looking back on it. It sounds really nice and tied up in a story and it looks good on paper. And I do think I got a lot of good experience, but I think really understanding the gravity of that situation, because at the end of the day, like, you know, there is still, I think, a lot of value. And let me say this, I think the value that's gained from doing the clinical work can, for the most part, mostly be transferred to non-clinical work. And
Mhm.
I'd rather see someone go and talk to, I don't know, a mentor, an advisor, a therapist, whatever, you know, and really start to parse out and pull out like, okay, what are my different skill sets? How can I apply those things? Then just leave and think it's going to automatically be applicable because like you have an
Mhm.
idea or something like that. But you also build relationships. You're going to be in the health care setting, building relationships through residency with the hospital administrators, with those people is important, which I've done. I've emailed the CEO of our hospital. I've met with him. Like I've met with the CMO. Like I've met with some of the leaders of our hospital, and you have kind of that advantage to do that and build those relationships
Mhm.
going through
Mhm.
residency. So I would definitely challenge people to look at the advantages versus disadvantages of it, and to not look at like the one-off person that like was like the most uber successful person. Like you can use those people for like inspiration and motivation, but I think it's important to not look at that one-off person and say, I'm going to be exactly like that. Because honestly, behind the scenes, like beyond a piece of paper, you really have no idea what happened. You have zero clue. And I learned that kind of the hard way. Like I would see people on LinkedIn who had done something cool or they did leave med school or residency or whatever else. Well, they accomplished this and this. And I don't want someone to look at my resume and think the same thing without at least like talking to me first, because like
Sure.
there is so much you don't know and there was so much like I was unprepared for, and
Yeah.
it becomes very painful in a lot of moments, like professionally and personally. Like I said, there's so much else that goes into it that I just caution people to kind of look at that. And I would use it for inspiration and motivation, but I would not just say I'm just going to do this exact same thing and that's going to be, like I said, I maintained a good relationship with the CEO of the right center, and I was able to prove my worth, yes, but also get opportunities that wouldn't be readily available to everybody. If you did go to a huge, you know, academic center, you probably wouldn't have the same opportunities that I had to kind of work up the ladder in the way that I did. So there's a
Right.
lot that comes into play. There's a lot of disadvantages, but advantages that I had too. And I think that those things are not always talked about enough. Like people love to talk about their disadvantages and how far they've come, but they don't always talk about the advantages that they had along the way either. And I will
For
say,
sure.
for as much adversity as I experienced, I also had a lot of advantages too. You know, I did have a good relationship with someone who was a physician, who led a community health center, who wanted behavioral health to be integrated with primary care, who wanted to address the needs of the community, who still practice themselves. Like that is someone who's very, very invested in the growth of themselves, the organization, other doctors. That's not universal, which I think I thought it was, because of what I had experienced. So I think
Right.
partially I was kind of naive through my own positive experiences and naive through some of my own negative experiences.
Yeah, totally understood. Well,
Yeah.
I think that that is great, great, great advice and a great place to wrap up a little bit. David, I hugely appreciate you sharing so much of your story, all of the lessons that you had to learn along the way, all of the moments of crisis when you don't really know what
hmm
the right thing to do is, but you still
hmm
have to like make a decision. And even if that may not be the correct decision that you would make again, you still are seeing it through to its entirety. I think that that's hugely commendable. I'm very excited to see what you end up doing in the next couple months after you sit for your boards and finish residency, and how you are able to straddle both of these worlds now with so much non-clinical experience under your belt and finally the real
hmm
like credentials to
Yeah.
prove it. I think that you're going to do some really awesome things. I'm excited to stay connected with you through Scrub Collaborative and see kind of what the next steps in the journey are. If the listeners have any questions for you or anything that you mentioned struck their interest, where can they reach out to you?
Probably LinkedIn's probably honestly the easiest because I'm very responsive to it,
Perfect.
and I give an email, but we all get so many emails. Honestly,
I will link your LinkedIn in the
yeah,
show notes. Listeners, if you want to reach out to me, my LinkedIn will be in the show notes as well. I'm also on Instagram. That will all be within the show notes for easy access. Any final questions for me, David?
I do really appreciate you having me on. I do want to look very quickly here, because I did write some last minute questions down.
Oh my.
Um, I guess it would be one of the things I wanted to ask you real briefly is, what is a role that you think is missing, like in healthcare right now? If you kind of create a role, like what do you think that would be?
A role on the clinical or non-clinical side?
That's a good question. I guess we could start with you could give one of each, but more maybe the non-clinical side, so we kind of see like with some of that focus, like what do you think is kind of missing, and maybe it exists somewhere, maybe it doesn't, but what do you think would be like most helpful if you just kind of say, poof, I'm going to hire somebody for this role tomorrow? Like, what would that be?
I think a dedicated clinical marketer would
Mm,
be an outstanding hire.
I like that.
I think a lot of the marketing work tends to come from like contractors, number one, and people who are not clinical.
Mhm.
So I think the people who are clinical who are doing it on their own impetus and they're, creating their own agencies. Like I even had someone on the podcast episode 1 with Caleb who he runs his own essentially like marketing agency, but he built that completely from the ground up. I think hiring a clinician who has like marketing or social media experience, even just from their own platform, on to
Mm,
tell the story of the brand, tell the story of the product through the lens of a clinician who gets it from day one would be amazing.
yeah, I
So I
completely
think
agree
that
with that.
that role, I've never seen that
Mm-mm.
like a truly clinical marketing lead, but I think that that could be a really great mashup of worlds.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
It is
As far as
absolutely missing.
clinical roles go, I have no idea.
Yeah, I'm not
I
sure on
think
that
I'm
front
I'm
either.
pretty traditional in that sense of
Yeah,
like it's worked for a really long
I
time.
agree.
Let's
Yeah,
just kind of leave it there.
I agree. Yeah,
What
no, I
about
think
you?
that's all. No, I would honestly agree. I really, I agree. I think the storytelling is like a huge missing component. It's kind of, we have this very much, well, it's broken, I'll fix it. And that's really all you need to know. You know, there's nothing else to it. You were broken. I will fix you. Well, whatever. What else? What more information do you need? You're fixed now. Goodbye. So I think that I completely agree. Honestly, I absolutely agree with you. I wouldn't create anything different at this point. It wouldn't be some other fancy finance thing or whatever else. It would be better ways to like tell our story.
Yeah, awesome. Well, yeah, that's what I'm trying to do with this podcast.
And thank you so much for having me on again.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Corporate Espionage. We will be back with you next week for another clinician who is pushing the bounds of what it means to work as a clinician, to live as a clinician. So if you're interested, please make sure to like and subscribe and follow for all the episodes that will drop in the future. Again, thanks, David. Enjoy the rest of your shift this afternoon. We are wishing you luck.
Thank you so much.
And we'll talk to you soon.
All right, talk to you later. Thank you.
See ya.